from a lady that wanted to preserve mainly our photos of the graduation classes at Lewis High. And actually, the oldest one is 1892 that graduated from Lewis to 1960 when the school was burned. So those are the photos over there. So, and otherwise, then we started fundraising. Then we started making some money. We had a lot of grants we applied for and received. We had a lot of donations. We ended up raising $560,000. Of course, that was and then the building was completed in 2012, so that's been 13 years ago. It would have cost more now, I'm sure. So, anyway, our items we take in here are only memorabilia of Lewis, but we accept it all. So any donations and memorials are kept track of, and so now we're excited to have this exhibit. We're very surprised and honored that Roy Marshall has given us this exhibit. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We've had it here and we decided we wanted to share it with more people. So that's why we did this exhibit. So I want to thank everybody that has helped put this on too and helped. So now we want to turn this over to two speakers, Roy Marshall and Jim Triller.
Welcome. I feel like a clown with these gloves on. But the reason is that some of this material, and we'll be touching it, is 80 years old. And it's in remarkably good condition. And Jim will, I'm sure, go into that in more detail. But I would ask that you be, as you look at it, please be careful about handling it and touching it, because especially the flags, which you can smell them. We've even got them on mothballs. They're irreplaceable. Dad was born here in Lewis in 1918, attended high school here. He took a job driving a tank wagon for his older brother, delivering Standard Oil, mostly to area farmers, and so he knew a lot of people. And he married my mother in the Methodist Church here in 1939, and he had two small children when he was drafted. Was he drafted in 43, Jim? Do you remember? I think it was 43, early 40, that he was drafted. And then of course that led to this collection. It was, the two little children he had were my sister and I, and Ruth, so great that you could make the trip, and Shannon brought you over, appreciate that so much. Ruth lives in Lincoln, and if you have any memories on this, any additions or corrections, feel free, Ruth. I don't remember, I remember very, very little about Dad's war years. I knew he was gone, but I didn't know what he was doing. I did feel Mother was a Holzebus, very German, and there was a conflict with her feelings on the war, and she was very careful as Ruth and I were growing up to explain the difference between good Germans and bad Germans, and I don't think she ever felt any resentment from any residents in Lewis over her German connections and relations, but she was very keen of that, and she also felt that Dad having two children going to war was maybe unfair, because she knew, in fact, she had relatives who were single, and because they had a essential occupation, an occupation essential to the war effort, they were not drafted, they did not go. So she had some resentment in that regard. Dad Dad's trophies, and it's gonna be Jim who goes into that. He's done a lot of research, a lot of work on this. Most of this was sent home by Dad when the war was over, but during the time he was in, he occupied Berlin. He was in Berlin after the war for several months. And he had the opportunity to send home his trophies, things that he picked up as he put it. He followed Patton across Europe, and he was very proud of the fact that at one time he saluted both Patton and Eisenhower. They were both in the same Jeep, he said, and he had the opportunity to salute them. And he didn't talk about the war after it was over. We had a few conversations, and it was always me who initiated them. And when he died comparatively young, he was 62. I've often thought that had he lived to be older, there are a lot of World War II veterans who, as they get into their 80s, they become more willing to talk about their experiences, and that may have happened with Dad. I don't know. After he had passed away, Mother decided to give these trophies of Dad's to her children, and she divided them up. Some of us, I was a little reluctant to see her do that, but that was her wishes, and so that's the way it was. But the flags went to one sister or another, and the knives and daggers dagger went to my brother and I, and they were all divided up. Well, really all over the country. I've got relatives in both coasts at one time. But after the Heritage Center here was completed, we had a place to put them then, and so the sisters and brothers got together and we decided to reassemble them, and so we did, and we had the case built and put them there. And they haven't had a lot of attention, frankly, until Jim Triller came to town. And I think Jim showed an immediate interest, and I think that is a good point for me to hand the mic off to Jim and let him tell you about it.
Smooth transition. I tend to talk loudly, so I'm not going to use the mic, but if you can't hear me, raise your hand and ask me to speak up. Also, I prefer conversations over lectures. So as we go through a lot of these artifacts, and our plan is, as we talk about them, that Nancy and other people will, with the white gloves, take them out. We'll take them out of the case and walk around so you can see them up close. I'm not a World War II expert, but I have a strong interest in it. And when I moved to Lewis 4 years ago, I forget why I was even in the library. I just kind of happened to be up here, and I took a look at this case. And right away, my jaw hit the floor. I've never seen, outside of the museum at the United States Military Academy at West Point, which I didn't grow up far from there, I've never seen a collection of this magnitude, and I was blown away. I mean, it was just like, holy cow. And one of the things I want to point out is, even though we're talking about these artifacts, I fully appreciate what they represent. I am in no way supporting the Nazi Party, Nazi Germany, any of the stuff that occurred, but I have a strong interest in it just because we're still living with the remains of World War II. It has greatly affected the world we live in, and I was always curious, how did we get to this point? I started going back, and as a kid, I was watching things like the documentary on the BBC put out years ago called The World at War, and it's excellent. I've gotten very much into the Band of Brothers, if you're familiar with that series. There's really good books about it. I just lent one to Roy. It's called Parachute Infantry, written by David Weber. If you're a Band of Brothers or a World War II, you have a strong interest in that, I highly recommend that book. He's one of the characters that provided the source material for Stephen Ambrose, the guy who actually wrote Band of Brothers. And if you see the series and read the book, you'll see things that he's writing about taken right into the show. I mean, it's an excellent resource. Some stuff I want to talk about with the Germans and Hitler. Hitler came to power in 1933, and he immediately, even though he was democratically elected, he immediately went and created laws and changed things to basically turn Germany into a dictatorship. Totalitarianism at its finest. And a lot of the stuff I read about Nazi Germany and how it got to be the way it was because he had this strong vision of what he was trying to create. He wrote a book while he was in prison back in the 20s called Mein Kampf. And if you want to see what Hitler was planning on doing, all you have to do is read Mein Kampf. And he laid it all out there. But the world didn't listen. And he came to power and he implemented his plans to do what he did, all the horrendous things that occurred because of Nazi Germany. One of the things that he really implemented was implementing his philosophy throughout the entire structure of Germany. And the goal was to have a 1,000-year Reich. In other words, he wanted this to go on and on and on forever. And he started with women. Women weren't going to be serving in the military. They weren't going to be Rosie the Riveter type people. Their job was to have as many kids as possible. And they actually had schools set up to train young women how to be a good Nazi wife. I kid you not. Not only were they supported financially, they were actually given medals for the number of kids they had. I have one as a souvenir. The more kids you had, I think when you had 5, you got an extra special medal, and if you had like 10, you got a really nice medal. But you kept getting more and more money. When you had your kids, then the kids went off to school. Schools were completely propagandized. It was just being fed the Nazi line completely throughout. And then when you hit about age 8 or 10, instead of going to the Boy Scouts, you joined the Hitler Youth, which was basically paramilitary training. They were grooming you to go into the military so you could either be in the Army or the SS or the SA and be a good little Nazi in supporting the fatherland. I mean, it permeated all levels of society, which will bring me to the first artifact I want to talk about, this flag. In 1933, when Hitler came to power, one of the things he was really against was Marxism. He was far right, he was not far left. He was really pushing to eradicate Marxism. And one of the reasons he had issues with Jews was he felt they were Marxist and they were really pushing the Marxist agenda in all levels of society. He wanted to purge them of that. And one of the issues in Germany that he wanted to address was trade unionism. He didn't like the unions. He wanted to abolish them. And he did. And what they came up with was the DAF. I can't pronounce it. I don't know how to speak German, so we're just going to stick with the DAF. But basically, all the unions were outlawed. People that were trying to stand up to Hitler, they'd be thrown out of windows or sent off to concentration camps. They were abolished. Unions were gone. Everything was the DAF. And if you weren't on board with the DAF, you weren't going to work in an industrial capacity. You weren't going to be a laborer in a factory. You weren't going to get jobs in government. You were basically verboten. You were finished. So this replaced all the unions in Germany in 1933. Like I said, he came to power in 33. He moved quickly to take control of everything. So that's what this flag is. It's his swastika in a cog representing machinery. So something else I want to talk about with Hitler, you know, they had very stylish uniforms. They had very stylish flags. I mean, you know, regardless of what you feel about these flags, they kind of like hit you, right? I mean, they're very emotionally moving. Hitler was really into graphics. He was a failed artist. Prior to the rising to political power, he tried to become an artist. And he actually, to earn money for a while, was painting postcards personally and just selling them on the street. And he applied to art school and he was rejected. But he always appreciated the power of graphics. And he actually designed these flags. If you're familiar with the swastika, until Hitler came along, they were really originated in Sanskrit and were viewed as a symbol of good luck or good fortune. If you look around the US Capitol building and some of the government buildings, you can actually find swastikas in the buildings because these were all designed, you know, some of our old government buildings were designed prior to World War II and the rise of Hitler. He decided to take the swastika though and put it on an angle. That was one of his deals. He liked the colors of red, white, and black because they were so contrasty. And he was also very much into presentations. If you ever have seen him speak in some of the old newsreels, he would practice and practice and practice for hours speaking in front of the public. He had a photographer who actually employed his future wife, Braun. She was an assistant for his photographer. He hired this guy full time to come in and take pictures of him rehearsing his speeches. So he'd do all these things, these mannerisms while he's talking and holding up his fist or looking up, and the photographer would be taking all these pictures of him. So he wanted to see how that would come across to the public as he talked. The guy was really a PR genius. I mean, it really is amazing what this guy accomplished. And again, that's not an endorsement for what he did, it's just an appreciation for he knew how to manipulate people and get them to come on board with his agenda. Something else I want to mention is Hitler technically was not in the military, even though he's the head of it. But if you take a look at Nazi Germany, and you see these guys in their uniforms, he was very much into fashion because he was trying to make statements and everything, not only flags and presentations and his lectures, but also how these guys were perceived. These guys right here were not in the military. And technically, the SS, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, you're all kind of familiar with the SS a little bit, they were not technically in the military. They were bodyguards. They were guys that originally came about to like just be bodyguards for Hitler, a very small unit. I'll talk about them a little bit more later. But it was, the whole thing was like this marketing push that would permeate the entire society. Okay, so we talked about that flag. We have people with white gloves. Some of these artifacts are very delicate and small, but I'd like to have them passed around so you can see them up close. And with that, when I say it permeated everything, it really did. Here's a German coin from Nazi Germany, and it's got a swastika and an eagle on it. And you just take a look at it up close. It's kind of hard to see, but it's also, yeah. He also, they had postage stamps. I mean, everything. Everything was, take a look at these things. And what's interesting with a lot of the artifacts, like the postage stamps, they have a likeness of Adolf Hitler. Well, Hitler died in 1945. He committed suicide in the bunker before he was taken, before he could be taken prisoner. He was a very rich man. Well, how did he make so much money? Well, he decided he wanted his likeness on postage stamps. So he got a royalty every time they printed stamps. And another thing he did, he wanted to gift copies of his book, Mein Kampf, to every member of the Nazi Party. Well, the Nazi Party would pay for those books, and he got the royalties. So it was really a money scheme. I mean, the guy was, any evil way to do something and make money, he did it. I mean, it was just amazing. So, okay. Another issue, and this is really a nice piece. I saw this one for the first time and I got excited.
How right you are.
So, every year they would have a Nazi Party rally. And I can't think of another analogy of today. It wasn't like the Republican and Democrat national committees getting together. These were just like big PR events that were to rally up people, get them excited, get the juices flowing again. They were pure propaganda. They were all completely staged and managed. But every year in Nuremberg, they had one of these things. And in 1933, this was the pin that you could stick on your uniform if you were in the military, or just put it on your lapel to show that you were a good Nazi, member and all that. But they had one of these things every year. And if you want to see what the rallies really look like, there's a documentary made by Leni Riefenstahl. She was a German filmmaker. She just died a few years ago. She lived to 101 or 102. It's available to see on YouTube for free. It's called Triumph of the Will. It's pure propaganda. It's kind of disturbing to watch it, but it just shows you the power of the imagery and the power of Hitler giving his speeches. And then you get this as a little souvenir at the end. Oh, I'll trade you. Just drop it in there. There you go. All right. There it is.
Mother would periodically take us to the attic where the trunk was that contained all this stuff. And I remember, and Ruth does too, being little, we'd go up and Dad, I don't remember Dad ever coming up and participating, did he?
No,
I don't think he ever did, but she would take the kids up and she would open the trunk and hand out the stuff like is being done here, and look at this and what it is. We didn't know what it was, and she didn't know what most of it was, but we found it fascinating. Especially, Jim will get to some stuff here in a minute that we found really fascinating. But this is too, and I'm enjoying this. I'm learning things.
Okay, so when I was talking about the uniforms, and I don't know, there's a misconception. If you guys have ever heard of the German clothing manufacturer Hugo Boss.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, still in business. They did not design the Nazi uniforms. There were other guys that did that, but Hugo Boss actually manufactured quite a few of them. So their hands aren't dirty, sort of. But anyway, so what this thing is, and I had to look this guy up. I had no clue. I knew it was a collar tab. So on most of the uniforms, there were these collar tabs up here. These things would denote rank and where you stood in an organization. These weren't from the military. This is not a military collar tab. This thing is from a mid-level Nazi Party, basically a bureaucrat. And if you know anything about Germany, Germany is really into bureaucracy, which came to bite them after the war because they were meticulous record keepers. Everything was documented out, you name it. And it came back to bite them because they had such good records of everything. It was used to prosecute the Nazi war criminals at the end of the war and help hang them. So anyway, we're going to pass this guy around. But if you take a look at this sheet, and I'll pass this around with this, you can see how these things were worn. And again, it looks military. It's not. It's got the Nazi eagle on there with the swastika. Again, that was Hitler's design. Okay, let's take a look. Any questions so far?
How would my grandpa, how would he have gotten a hold of all of these different things?
Well, my understanding talking to Roy was your granddad, he was riding around in a Jeep. And he was assigned to this officer, and they're kind of doing sort of like reconnaissance work as they're buzzing around. So he had a Jeep.
They were a combat engineering company, and they would do bridges and road repairs, and in some cases they might blow up a bridge, in other cases they might build one or improvise one. They were going from point A to point B being Berlin, Germany. They were headed for the heart of Germany, and Dad drove a Jeep for the company commander, at least part-time. He's talked about that, the CO, and they'd get in the Jeep and we're going out and recon this bridge or that road or whatever, and make plans as to what they were gonna, how they were gonna accomplish whatever they were supposed to accomplish. So he had space that a lot of the infantry guys didn't have. They're walking and he's in a Jeep, so he's got a little room to pick stuff up. And also, after the war, or after the surrender, it wasn't really after the war for Dad, he was there for, occupied, as I say, Berlin for some time. But they were able to crate this stuff up, put it in boxes and ship it home without any charge. So it was shipped to your grandma then.
Yeah, the thing to keep in mind,
Roy's chair, don't.
as I said earlier,
Dirty trick.
the Nazi artifacts, it permeated society. It was everywhere. If you see pictures of Berlin prior to and just before and during the war, these flags were everywhere. They had streets lined with them. The money, as Rick's gonna walk around with, the money, aside from the coin that already went around, it had the Nazi symbol on it. It was a Reichsmark. It wasn't a mark, it was a Reichsmark. Everything in society was to support the Nazi cause. And literally everything. I mean, it was just total propaganda infiltrating your life. An interesting thing I've read about is, like, if you weren't a member of the Nazi party, let's say you were a shopkeeper, as long as you kept your nose out of the Nazi business, you weren't resistant to the Nazi business, you weren't criticizing, you were okay, they'd leave you alone. But the second you opened your mouth about it, they'd ship you off to a concentration camp. They would take all of your belongings and sell them, which is another way how the Third Reich financed itself. All the Jews they rounded up, taking their artwork, the antiques, jewelry, they'd sell it all to finance the Nazi party. So you wanted to keep your nose out of their business. There were resistance people. There was a group called the White Rose. They were young college students, and they started sending out leaflets, anti-Nazi material. They were captured and one day tried and executed. That's how these guys played. They were savages. They were totally brutal. The beginning of the SA, which was the brown shirts, if you ever heard of those guys, not the SS, but the SA, these guys came into existence just to go around with Hitler when Hitler was in his formative years becoming involved in politics, basically hired thugs. They were goons that would go in, and anybody that was speaking up against them, these guys would come in and rough you up and throw you out. I mean, it was, that's really who these kinds of people were. So this is one of the nicest pieces in this collection, in my opinion.
He went crazy when he saw that.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I mean, I didn't even see the flag yet. Some of these flags, they were all folded up in the bottom. But so this is an SA dagger. The SA, like I said, the brown shirts, as time went by, they became a little more organized, and this guy named Ernst Röhm took over, and he really turned them into a full-fledged paramilitary organization. Trouble with Ernst was he was starting to get a little too popular, a little too powerful, and Hitler he viewed him as a threat. And also, Ernst had a rival, this guy named Himmler. You heard of Himmler? Himmler was this guy that was feeling left out. He didn't serve in World War I. He didn't have any military medals. Had a little bit of a complex, a little inferiority complex to Ernst Röhm. And he and Hermann Goering, the guy who took over as the head of the Nazi Air Force, the Luftwaffe, decided that Ernst Röhm was becoming a liability. And in a time called the Night of the Long Knives, decided to dispatch good old Ernst, get him out of the way, and then consolidate power. And that was done, and Ernst Röhm was rounded up on the Night of the Long Knives and a few other guys, and good night, Ernst. Anyway, this is a ceremonial dagger from an SA uniform, and when I talked about how the Nazis wanted to permeate society and everything, well, on the blade is written, and I can't really, something for Deutschland.
All is for Deutschland.
Everything's for Germany. Everything. Your kids, your education, everything you do. And as the war dragged on, they started talking about total war because they were starting to lose the war. But everything, you weren't a person, you were just a cog in the machine for the Nazis. So, very nice piece. If I can trade you, Rick. Pass that guy around. And some of these things, they are quite valuable. So that's why we're not, we don't want you to personally handle them. We just don't want anything to possibly walk out the door. Thank you. It's a very nice piece. It's not for combat, that's basically ceremonial. We don't have the combat pieces here, even though my understanding is that Roy's dad brought back several Mausers and a Luger. I don't know what happened to him. Roy, did he? Mom.
Mom didn't like the guns. Dad shipped home, I think, was it 2 of the rifles or 3? I don't remember, but they were the big Mauser Army rifles, and one P-38, a Walther P-38 automatic. Would have been a very valuable gun to have now.
Yeah.
But Mom didn't want them, and so Dad sold them.
Yeah. Anyway, and then this is, I really couldn't place this specifically, but it's a bayonet, and this is why you have this portion here. You would clip this onto the end of your trusty Mauser rifle. This isn't a combat piece. This is just like ceremonial stuff when guys are marching in parades. But it's made by Soligen. If you're familiar with German cutlery, they're very much still in business. Most of these companies that made all this stuff, they're still in business. If you ever look at the European airplane manufacturer, Airbus, they came about because they were consolidating all these smaller aircraft manufacturers like Messerschmitt, which survived the war. And something else I just want to mention as a note by the way, a lot of people say, well, how did Germany lose the war? I mean, they were such a professional, well-trained, well-equipped army. Well, my theory is, and I can back it up with a lot of historical facts, Hitler never should have gone into Russia. That was a big mistake. He underestimated the size of Russia and the resources of Russia and the determination of this guy named Stalin. Big mistake. And then he made the mistake of, a few days after Pearl Harbor, he declared war on the United States. Big mistake. People will hear about our military and the great guys that served in our military, all true, but what really cooked the Germans or the Nazis, we were untouched by the war. We had full industrial capacity. And in those days, the United States was by far the largest industrial economy in the world. They could not compete. The Germans made great equipment. Their their tanks, the Tiger tanks were great, even though they were kind of unreliable. They were not the masters of mass production. The United States was. We were turning out B-24 bombers up in this place in Michigan called Willow Run at the rate of 1 an hour. It would take the Germans weeks to build an airplane. So when we got involved and we started the shooting war with them, we would lose a couple of planes, no problem. We've got 5 times the population of Germany, and we've got an untouched industrial base cranking out a plane 1 an hour. They couldn't compete. It was just a one-sided war once the United States got involved. And I don't think there was ever any doubt how that war is going to end. And the United States at the time, with Franklin Roosevelt as president, he said, here's the strategy. We're going to win in Europe first, and then we'll put our resources in the Pacific on Japan. So it was a conscious move. We were just going to kind of hold the Japanese at a stalemate, and then we're going to win in Europe, because that was the bigger threat that needed to be rectified at the time. Anyway, trade you, Rick. All right. what Nancy's coming around with, these are actually military uniforms. There's an eagle with a swastika in the center on both of these pieces. The smaller one is for a cap. Have you seen like those old war movies and the guys have the fancy caps up here and an eagle? That's what the smaller one is. The larger one is for over your breast pocket on a military uniform. So these are actually military uniform items.
This is just crazy. It's amazing. Okay.
And then these two medals, if you've ever heard of it, are the Iron Cross. These are high-level military awards. After the war, during the what's called denazification period, immediately after the war, there were a lot of professional soldiers in the German army, in the military. And even though some of these awards were given during the Nazi period, they were still allowed to wear them. However, they only could wear them with the swastika removed. So a lot of these medals after the war were reissued. A lot of the professional soldiers that weren't involved in the Nazi party, that were actually decent guys that were following orders, they would still wear the medals, but again, anything that had the swastikas, anything related to Nazi Germany, it all had to be removed. So the only things left still are like museum pieces like those. And by the way, Hitler, actually, he served in World War I as a messenger. He had been wounded. He had suffered injuries from gas in World War I, and he was awarded for his military bravery, both the Iron Cross First Class and the Iron Cross Second Class. And if you ever see him in some of his kind of military outfits, which he wore most of the time, that's what you see on his. He always wore this First Class swastika Iron Cross. You got to give him credit where it's due. The guy actually earned those medals. That's one of the things that made Himmler a little, jealous, because Himmler didn't have any of that stuff. And he'd go to all these events, and all these guys with all this stuff on there, and he's looking. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? I think we're getting close to the end. Something I want to talk about, the big flag, is this is a military flag. This guy here, you'd see it out there sometimes on tanks or whatever. It really isn't. That was the flag of Nazi Germany. This guy here is for the Wehrmacht, if I pronounce that correctly. The Wehrmacht was the Nazi Germany military. And it was composed of three branches. The Luftwaffe, which is your Air Force. And if you ever go to Berlin, the Luftwaffe headquarters building is now a German government building, and it's almost in pristine condition. During all the bombing of Berlin, it never got hit. How? I'll never know. But it's still there. You can go into it. It's a public building. It's amazing it survived. Most of the Nazi buildings of that era in Berlin were obliterated. I mean, they got bombed, and the Allies afterwards would blow them up to get rid of them, and that building still stands. The other branches were the Kriegsmarine, which was the Navy, guys with the U-boats and the Bismarck, the battleship Bismarck, and also the Heer. You probably don't hear the name Heer much, but that was the ground pounders, the army troops. So those three branches of the military, and this flag, which I think the old joke, Roy, was somebody wanted to cut it up and turn it into a wedding dress or something like that.
That was Jew.
This is one big flag. It's made of wool. It's in very good condition. And these things, as Roy's dad was driving all over the country, were everywhere.
Wait,
I've got to turn.
turn it that way.
It's a big flag.
Wow.
Oh yeah,
It's pretty impressive
it is impressive.
that we have this here.
So,
Who's that tall? Who's that tall? Who's that tall? I'm the short one here.
everybody have a good look?
Oh, it's awesome.
It's mind-boggling.
All right.
No, I don't either.
Well, it's beautiful in a way.
In a way.
Graphic design.
Well, what it represents.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yes, but.
Would the Iron Cross be on the top or on the bottom?
That's at the top.
Okay.
So that, yeah.
This was hanging from a balcony, so I was told. And I don't remember the name of the town, do you, Ruth? But,
Okay. Going that way?
supposedly Dad was driving, he and the company commander were reconnoitering something and passed through this town and saw this hanging from a balcony, and Dad stopped the Jeep and jumped out and ran up 2 or 3 floors and took the flag.
There you go. Let it
Looting,
go.
if you will, or trophies of war, souvenirs.
Yeah. I don't know if Roy's dad was doing this, but if you read the book that I just went to Roy, Parachute Infantry, a lot of these forward deployed guys in Jeeps, what they were looking for was a place to put U.S. troops up, because the U.S. advancing through Germany was happening so fast that they were running out of places to station the troops, to put them up for the night. And these guys would go into towns. Sounds a little brutal, but you gotta remember the time and what was going on. They would go into houses and kick the occupants out and say, you got an hour, pack up what you want and get out, because we're gonna put our troops here. And while they were doing that, they would also come across, there was a lot of widows because their husband had gone off, to fight for the Nazi Germany, and they were killed. Well, these troops would come in and say, hey, that'd be a nice souvenir, or take the silver tea set, or find, photographs of, the deceased officer, or any of his military uniforms, and they'd take them all. When they got to Berchtesgaden, which is where Hitler had his own house, and then the top level of the Nazi party had houses. When those guys got there, they just went on a field trip. I mean, they just went bananas. Hermann Goering had completely looted all of Western Europe. I mean, it's just ridiculous what this guy stole. And he also had a tremendous wine cellar, just cases and cases and cases of booze. And the U.S. officers, they didn't care. Guys, have at it. And man, they did. They busted in, and they were, in the book I just lent Roy, they talk about it. Oh, we just found this big stash of gin, and they'd be passing it out to everybody. And these guys would get drunk and hammered and stealing everything they could find. Most of it was stolen stuff anyway, and they would just take it all. And as the war was winding down, Hitler's got out of Berchtesgaden. He had a house called the Berghof, where he'd had a lot of high-level meetings, and dignitaries, before the war started, would come and meet there and trying to talk with Hitler to avoid the war. When Chamberlain from England, the Prime Minister Chamberlain, came over, he went to the Berghof, got the full military royal treatment, all this stuff, and then returned to England and said, peace in our time. I've got a document signed by Hitler, which is worth nothing, saying, oh, we're not going to have a war, and then war broke out in '39. All this stuff was still available for the most part, and the U.S. troops just went through and ransacked it all. And in those days, like with Roy's dad, you could just send everything back. It didn't matter. You crate it up, especially if you're an officer, take it in, give it to the postal clerk, they crate it up for you and ship it back at no charge. That's why there's so much of this stuff still around, even though this is a very nice collection. And to finish up, since we were talking about the Berghof, Roy's dad was there. Well, these are actually pieces of Hitler's house. The house is pretty much not standing. There's still remnants of it. There's pieces of basement wall, and you can still see where the driveway used to be, but for the most part it's gone. The Allies, at the end of the war, as the war was just really winding down, they just came in and did massive particularly the British. I think it was just a massive bombing run. And most of these guys' houses were just obliterated. And Hitler also gave orders to the SS, his most loyal guys, his lifeguard, to destroy the place. Hitler didn't want any of the records to be found. But they were such good record keepers, there was too much stuff, and they couldn't destroy it all. And he also had all these huge underground bunkers and tunnel system all underneath Berchtesgaden, connecting all the Nazi leaders' houses. And down there were all these artifacts, records, Hitler's personal items. They couldn't get rid of it all. It was just too much. But the actual house did get blown up by the Allies, and then it was also blown up by the SS. There was still remained standing. It was kind of a ruin. But then the German government, with the assistance of the U.S. government after the war, said, we're getting rid of this thing. They didn't want it to turn into some kind of a shrine to Hitler. And they came in and dynamited the place. So there's really almost nothing left of it. But these are pieces of Hitler's home in Berchtesgaden in the Obersalzberg section of Germany. So it's not a lot to see, but and I think that's a good spot to end it. If you got any questions, you want to talk more to me or Roy, I mean, we're happy to, I think, hang around for a little bit. But I really appreciate you coming, and it really is a treasure. I mean, it's a really a nice testament too to the U.S. troops to do the filthy, dirty job those guys did.
Are you
Anyway,
related to
thank
Roy?
you for coming.